Hello everyone. Today we are going on an exciting journey through the history of the Roman Empire. We will explore how a small city on the Tiber grew into a powerful empire, built roads and cities, created an army and an economy that amazed the ancient world. Together, we will look at Roman politics, the lives of ordinary people, culture, the military, and trade, as well as the reasons for its decline. Get ready for fascinating stories of great conquests, intrigues, and remarkable individuals who left their mark on history. Let's uncover the secrets of the Roman Empire. Chapter 1. The Myth of Romulus and Remus. The story of Rome begins not with the stone of walls or the clash of armies, but with a legend, one that has been told and retold for centuries until it became the very foundation of Roman identity. It is the myth of Romulus and Remus, the twin brothers whose destiny, shaped by gods and fate, would lead to the creation of the eternal city. As with many great civilizations, the Romans looked back to a mixture of history and mythology to explain their origins. For them, Rome was not merely founded by men. It was born from divine intervention, struggle, and the mysterious will of destiny. According to Roman tradition, the story begins in Alba Longa, an ancient city in central Italy, said to be founded by Ascanius, the son of the Trojan hero Aeneas. Aeneas himself was a survivor of the Trojan War, who, guided by the gods and carrying his aged father on his back, fled the burning ruins of Troy. His long journey, famously recounted in Virgil's Aeneid, brought him eventually to the shores of Italy. There he established a line of kings that would rule Alba Longa for generations. This connection to Troy was crucial for Roman self-image. It tied them to one of the greatest epics of the ancient world, giving them a heroic ancestry that placed them in the continuum of divine history. Generations after Aeneas, the throne of Alba Longa came under dispute. Numitor, the rightful king, was overthrown by his ambitious brother Amulius. To secure his rule, Amulius feared the descendants of Numitor might one day rise against him. He therefore forced Numitor's daughter, Rhea Silvia, to become a Vestal virgin, a priestess sworn to chastity and service of the goddess Vesta. By this act, he hoped to cut off Numitor's bloodline forever. Yet fate had other plans. Despite her vows, Rhea Silvia gave birth to twin boys. She claimed that their father was Mars, the god of war. Whether one believes in the divine parentage or not, the Romans embraced this tale, for it gave their founders not just noble Trojan blood, but also direct descent from a god. Amulius, enraged at this turn of events, ordered the infants to be drowned in the Tiber River. Yet destiny again intervened. The basket carrying the babies drifted down the river until it came to rest at the foot of the Palatine Hill. There, a she-wolf discovered the crying infants. Instead of devouring them, she nursed them, giving them her milk. This miraculous image, two human babies suckling at the teats of a wolf, became one of the most enduring symbols of Rome. Some later rationalists suggested that the she-wolf might have been a human woman, perhaps a shepherdess whose nickname was lupa, a word that could mean both wolf and prostitute. But for Romans, the story of the wolf was not to be stripped of its mythic power. It represented nature itself, the wildness and strength that would one day characterize Rome. Soon after, a shepherd named Faustulus discovered the children and brought them to his home. He and his wife raised the boys as their own, unaware of their true parentage. Romulus and Remus grew up strong, bold, and natural leaders among the shepherds of the countryside. They were known for their courage and their sense of justice, often defending the weak from bandits or oppressors. In time, their origins were revealed, and they learned of their grandfather Numitor's dethronement. Fueled by both righteous anger and ambition, they led a revolt, overthrew Aemilius, and restored Numitor to the throne of Alba Longa. Yet the brothers were not content to remain merely subjects of Alba. They wished to found a city of their own, a new settlement that would carry their legacy forward. The site they chose was the place where fate had spared them, the banks of the Tiber, near the Palatine Hill. But as often happens in stories of brothers, unity gave way to rivalry. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill as the site of the city, while Remus preferred the Aventine Hill. To decide who was right, they turned to augury, the sacred practice of reading omens from the flight of birds. According to one version of the story, Remus saw 6 birds first, while Romulus later saw 12. Dispute arose over whether priority or number mattered more. Heated words turned to violence. The tragic climax of the legend came when Remus mocked his brother by leaping over the walls Romulus had begun to build, symbolically undermining the new city's defenses. In fury, Romulus struck him down, killing his own twin. "So perish whoever else shall leap over my walls," he is said to have cried. With that, Romulus became the sole founder of the city, which he named after himself, Rome. Thus, from fratricide was born the city that would one day rule the world. This tale, dark and heroic at once, reveals much about the Roman psyche. It is not a story of idyllic harmony but of struggle, sacrifice, and violence. Rome, according to its own mythology, was born in blood, not just the blood of enemies, but the blood of a brother. This theme of harsh necessity, of greatness emerging from ruthless decisions, was central to Roman values. To be Roman was to accept that destiny was unforgiving, that power came at a price, and that order often demanded sacrifice. Romulus did not stop at founding the city. He became its first king. According to tradition, he established its first institutions: the Senate, the divisions of the people into tribes, and the practices of worship. Yet Rome faced another problem. It had few women. To solve this, Romulus devised a controversial plan, the infamous rape of the Sabine women. He invited the neighboring Sabines to a festival and, at a signal, the Romans seized their daughters. This act led to war with the Sabines, but in the end, the women themselves intervened, placing themselves between their fathers and their new husbands, pleading for peace. Their dual loyalty created unity, and Rome and the Sabines merged into one people. Again, we see how violence and reconciliation intertwined in Rome's early myth. As for Remus, though he perished, his memory remained. Some versions of the legend suggest that Romulus later regretted killing his brother and honored him with burial and rites. The duality of the twins, one dead, one triumphant, haunted Roman imagination for centuries. It became a metaphor for the cost of ambition, the tragic tension between kinship and destiny. Even the image of the she-wolf with the twins, later cast in bronze and displayed in the heart of Rome, spoke of that strange mixture of nurture and savagery, of nature's mercy and man's violence. Historians of later ages debated the truth of this tale. Livy, the Roman historian, recounted it with solemn respect but admitted its mythical nature. Others speculated on rational explanations, such as political struggles between early tribes on the Palatine and Aventine hills. Yet for the Romans themselves, the literal truth mattered less than the symbolic one. The myth of Romulus and Remus explained not just how Rome began, but what Rome was. A city born under divine signs, marked by conflict, destined for greatness. The figure of Romulus loomed large even beyond his earthly reign. Roman tradition held that he ruled for many years, expanding the city, waging wars, and establishing its power. Then, one day, during a storm, he vanished. Some said He was assassinated by jealous senators and his body torn to pieces. But the official legend declared that Romulus had been taken up into the heavens by the gods, transformed into the god Quirinus, one of Rome's great deities. Thus the founder did not die but ascended, becoming eternal, like the city itself. This legend had lasting significance. By claiming descent from Mars and connection to Aeneas, Rome tied itself to both divine and heroic traditions. By telling of Romulus' fratricide, it acknowledged that power demands sacrifice. By elevating Romulus to godhood, it proclaimed that the city's destiny was sanctioned by heaven. The myth of Romulus and Remus was not simply a story for children, but a national charter, a sacred tale that gave Romans their sense of who they were and why they were destined to rule. Even today, the story resonates. The image of the she-wolf nursing the twins is known around the world, a symbol of Rome's endurance. The narrative of conflict and destiny still captures the imagination, reminding us that great civilizations are not born easily, but through struggle, choices, and myth that carry meaning across the centuries. The tale of Romulus and Remus is more than a legend. It is the first chapter in the long, complex, and fascinating history of the Roman Empire. Chapter 2: The Kings of Early Rome. When we think of Rome, we often imagine the Grand Republic or the mighty empire stretching across continents. Yet before senators debated in marble halls or emperors commanded legions, Rome was a kingdom, ruled by a line of monarchs, whose stories stand at the threshold between legend and history. The Romans themselves preserved these tales in their collective memory, passing them down through generations until they became part of their identity. These early kings were more than rulers. They were cultural architects, lawgivers, and warriors who shaped the foundations of what Rome would become. According to tradition, Rome had 7 kings, beginning with Romulus and ending with Tarquin the Proud. Each king represented something essential about the early city, and each reign added a layer to its evolving character. Whether they truly existed as described or were idealized figures woven into legend, their stories reflect the values, fears, and aspirations of the Romans. By exploring their reigns, we gain insight not only into Rome's origins, but also into the way Romans saw themselves. The first king, Romulus, is remembered not just as founder, but as a man who turned myth into political order. After the tragic death of his brother Remus, Romulus faced the task of transforming a band of followers into a community. He established the Senate, an assembly of 100 men who would later be called the Patres, the fathers of Rome. From them came the patricians, the aristocratic class that dominated Roman politics for centuries. Romulus also divided his people into tribes and curiae, early social units that organized the population. He gave the city its first laws, its first warriors, and its first citizens. But he was not merely a lawgiver. Romulus, the warlike son of Mars, expanded Rome through conquest, incorporating neighboring peoples. He symbolized the balance of violence and statecraft, a founder who set the tone for Rome's destiny as both a community of laws and a power forged in battle. After Romulus' mysterious disappearance, whether by divine assent or by assassination, Rome entered a new stage. The second king was Numa Pompilius, a figure almost the opposite of Romulus in character. Where Romulus had been a warrior, Numa was said to be wise, pious, and devoted to peace. He came from the Sabines, a neighboring people who had merged with Rome after the famous episode of the Sabine women. Numa was chosen as king for his reputation of justice and his deep spirituality. His reign emphasized religion, law, and moral order rather than conquest. Tradition credits Numa with establishing many of Rome's key religious institutions. He organized the priesthoods, including the pontifices, the augurs, and the flamens. He introduced the Vestal Virgins into Roman society, giving them their sacred role in tending the eternal flame of Vesta. He set down rituals, festivals, and sacrifices, giving the people a calendar of sacred time. It was Numa, too, who brought order to the Roman year, structuring months and days in a system that echoed through Roman life for centuries. More than any single law, what Numa gave Rome was a sense of the sacred, a conviction that the gods guided the city, and that piety was as important as courage. If Romulus represented Mars, the god of war, Numa represented peace and harmony. Together, their reigns embodied the dual pillars of Roman identity: strength in battle and reverence for the gods. The Romans believed that a city could not endure by force alone. It needed moral foundation, ritual, and respect for divine will. The third king, Tullus Hostilius, swung the pendulum back toward war. Whereas Numa was said to abhor violence, Tullus gloried in it. He sought to expand Rome's power through conquest, seeing war as the natural path of the city. Under his reign, Rome fought against Alba Longa, the very city from which Romulus had sprung. This conflict produced one of the most famous episodes in Roman lore, the combat of the Horatii and the Curiatii. Instead of waging a battle between armies, the two cities agreed to let sets of triplet brothers fight on their behalf. The Roman Horatii faced the Alban Curiatii in a contest that would decide the war. Two of the Horatii were killed, but the third outwitted his opponents by facing them one by one, killing them in turn. Rome triumphed, and Alba Longa was destroyed, its people absorbed into Rome. Tullus was fierce and ambitious, but according to legend, he lacked reverence for the gods. When plague struck Rome, he attempted to perform sacred rites, but did so improperly. Jupiter, angered at his arrogance, struck him with a thunderbolt. Thus Tullus' reign ended in destruction, a warning to future Romans that even kings must respect the divine. Following Tullus came Ancus Marcius, the fourth king, said to be the grandson of Numa Pompilius. Ancus combined the qualities of his predecessors. He was a warrior like Romulus and Tullus, but also a builder and organizer like Numa. His reign emphasized the integration of conquered peoples. He expanded Rome's territory, but also worked to include new citizens, establishing settlements and giving them rights. Ancus was credited with building Rome's first bridge across the Tiber, the Pons Sublicius, linking the city with lands beyond. He also established the port of Ostia, giving Rome its first access to the sea, a development that foreshadowed its future as a naval and commercial power. Ancus represented balance, a reminder that Rome's strength lay not only in conquest, but in assimilation and infrastructure. The fifth king, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, marked the beginning of Rome's Etruscan period. According to legend, he was originally from Etruria, a region north of Rome, and moved to the city to seek his fortune. Through cleverness and ambition, he rose to power and became king. His reign symbolizes the influence of Etruscan culture on Rome. The Etruscans were skilled builders and engineers, and under Tarquinius Priscus, Rome saw the beginnings of monumental architecture. He began work on the great sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, which drained the marshes and allowed the Forum to become the heart of the city. He also initiated the construction of the Circus Maximus, the vast arena for chariot races that became central to Roman public life. Tarquinius expanded Rome's military power and introduced symbols of kingship, such as the purple robe and the ivory throne, which would later influence the trappings of Roman magistrates. The sixth king, Servius Tullius, was a remarkable figure whose rise to power itself carried legendary elements. Tradition holds that as a child, a miraculous flame was seen burning around his head while he slept, a sign of divine favor. Raised in the royal household, he eventually married the daughter of Tarquinius Priscus and succeeded him as king. Servius is remembered as a great reformer and organizer. He restructured Roman society by creating the census, dividing citizens according to wealth, and assigning them duties in the army and rights in political assemblies. This system, though legendary in its origins, foreshadowed the Roman Republic's complex balance between social classes. Servius also expanded the city physically, building the Servian Wall, which encircled the seven hills and defined Rome's early boundaries. His reign symbolized growth, order, and the recognition that Rome's destiny lay in uniting people of diverse backgrounds under a common civic identity. But Servius' end was dark. He was overthrown and murdered by his ambitious son-in-law, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, better known as Tarquin the Proud, the seventh and final king of Rome. Tarquin seized power violently and ruled with tyranny. He ignored the Senate, relied on fear, and carried out lavish building projects, including completing the great temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill. His reign epitomized arrogance and cruelty. The final spark that led to his downfall was the infamous episode of his son Sextus Tarquinius and Lucretia, a noblewoman whose tragic fate outraged the Romans. According to legend, Sextus assaulted Lucretia, and in despair, she took her own life. Her death ignited a revolution. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, the Romans expelled Tarquin and abolished the monarchy. In 509 BCE, they established the Republic, vowing never again to be ruled by kings. Thus ended the era of the Seven Kings, a mixture of legend and history that explained Rome's earliest development. Each king symbolized a principle: Romulus, foundation and war; Numa, religion and peace; Tullus, martial ambition; Ancus, balance and building; Tarquinius Priscus, innovation and grandeur; Servius Tullius, reform and expansion; and Tarquin the Proud, tyranny and downfall. The cycle of their reigns told Romans not only where they had come from, but what values to honor and what dangers to avoid. Though modern historians question the literal truth of these stories, the Romans themselves believed them deeply. To them, the monarchy was both a time of greatness and a cautionary tale. It gave them their first laws, institutions, and identity, but it also ended in oppression, reminding them why liberty mattered. The memory of the kings lingered in Rome's collective mind for centuries. Even when emperors later ruled with absolute power, they were careful to avoid the title of king, for to Romans, the word carried the shadow of Tarquin's tyranny. The legends of the kings of Rome serve as a mirror of Roman culture itself. Proud, religious, ambitious, wary of despotism, and always conscious of destiny. They show us a city learning to govern itself, experimenting with power, and preparing, unknowingly, for the long road ahead, the road that would lead from monarchy to republic, and eventually to empire. Chapter 3. The Birth of the Roman Republic. When the Romans finally cast out their last king, they did more than overthrow a tyrant. They reshaped their society in a way that would leave a lasting mark on history. The year 509 BCE was remembered as the moment Rome was reborn, no longer a city ruled by one man, but a community guided by law, custom, and shared responsibility. It was the beginning of the Roman Republic, an experiment in governance that blended monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy into a unique political system. Though born in conflict and imperfect in practice, the Republic would endure for nearly 5 centuries, shaping not only Roman identity, but also the political imagination of the Western world. The immediate cause of this transformation was the fall of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud. His violent seizure of the throne, his disregard for the Senate, and his reliance on fear had already alienated much of Rome's population. But the final outrage came not from the king himself, but from his son, Sextus Tarquinius. The tragic story of Lucretia became the catalyst for revolution. Lucretia, celebrated for her chastity and virtue, was assaulted by Sextus. In despair, she called her family and friends, declared what had been done to her, and took her own life. Her death became a symbol of violated honor and intolerable tyranny. It was Lucius Junius Brutus, a nobleman who had long disguised his sharp mind beneath a mask of foolishness, who seized the moment. Gathering the outraged citizens, Brutus vowed never again to tolerate kingship in Rome. With other nobles, he led the uprising that expelled Tarquin and his family. The revolution was swift but decisive. The monarchy was abolished, and in its place arose a system designed to prevent any single man from holding unchecked power. The core of the new republic was the office of the consuls. Instead of one king, Rome would be governed by 2 consuls, elected annually. Each consul held the authority of imperium, the right to command armies and govern, but because there were 2, each could check the other. Their power was also limited by time. No consul could rule for more than a year. This rotation of power was central to the Roman idea of liberty, for it ensured that leadership was temporary and accountable. Supporting the consuls was the Senate, which had existed under the monarchy but now gained greater influence. Composed primarily of patricians, or aristocratic families, the Senate became the central deliberative body, guiding policy, advising magistrates, and shaping Rome's foreign and domestic affairs. Though it technically lacked legislative power, its prestige and continuity made it the heart of the republic. Senators saw themselves as guardians of tradition, the mos maiorum, or custom of the ancestors, which was the guiding principle of Roman society. But the republic was not merely an aristocratic council. The people themselves had a voice through assemblies. The comitia centuriata, organized by centuries or military units, elected consuls and other magistrates. This assembly reflected the military character of Roman society. Political power was tied to the duty of bearing arms. Wealthier citizens, who could afford better equipment, had greater voting power, but even poorer citizens participated in the process. Over time, other assemblies developed, such as the Comitia Tributa and the Concilium Plebis, which gave plebeians, the common people, avenues to express their interests. The early republic was fragile, constantly threatened both from within and without. Tarquin the Proud did not quietly accept his exile. He sought allies among neighboring Etruscan kings and attempted to reclaim his throne by force. Rome faced immediate wars, testing whether its new system could survive in battle. Brutus himself died in combat against the forces of Tarquin, a fitting symbol of the republic's precarious birth. Yet the Romans persevered, defeating Tarquin's allies and securing their independence. Still, internal tensions soon emerged. The Roman Republic had been founded by nobles, and its institutions were dominated by patricians. Plebeians, who made up the bulk of the population and army, found themselves excluded from high office and burdened with debts. Their grievances gave rise to what historians call the struggle of the orders, a centuries-long conflict between patricians and plebeians over political rights and social justice. In the earliest years of the Republic, this struggle took the form of protests and threats of secession, as plebeians demanded greater representation. One of the earliest concessions to the plebeians was the creation of the office of the tribunes of the people. These tribunes, elected by the plebeians themselves, had the power to protect individuals from unjust treatment by magistrates. Their most significant weapon was the right of intercessio, or veto, the ability to block decisions that harmed the plebeian interest. Though their authority was limited at first, the tribunes became a powerful force in Roman politics, a symbol of the people's voice against aristocratic dominance. The tension between patricians and plebeians was not simply a class struggle. It was also about defining what liberty meant in Rome. To the patricians, liberty was the freedom of the aristocracy to govern without tyranny. To the plebeians, liberty was protection from exploitation and a share in decision-making. The Republic, then, was not a static system but a dynamic experiment, constantly adjusting through conflict and compromise. Externally, the early Republic was tested by continual warfare. Rome's neighbors, the Etruscans, the Latins, and the Sabines, saw the fledgling Republic as vulnerable. Yet war became not a burden, but a defining feature of Roman life. Every year, consuls led armies into the field, and every year Rome fought for survival. Victory brought new lands and subjects, while defeat threatened the city's very existence. Through these struggles, the Romans developed a culture of discipline, resilience, and adaptability. Perhaps the most striking feature of the Republic's birth was its deep connection to Roman identity. The memory of the kings, especially Tarquin the Proud, haunted the Roman imagination. The Romans developed a profound hatred of monarchy. To them, the very word, rex, king, became a symbol of tyranny. Even centuries later, when generals held extraordinary power or emperors would eventually rise, they avoided the title of king, cloaking their authority in republican forms. This fear of kingship was the Republic's founding myth, the belief that liberty could only be preserved if no man ruled alone. But liberty in the Roman sense did not mean equality. The Republic was hierarchical, favoring the wealthy and noble, and often indifferent to the struggles of the poor. Yet within its framework lay the seeds of a broader participation. Over time, plebeians would win greater rights, laws would be codified, and the Republic would become more inclusive. The struggle was slow and often painful, but it kept the Republic alive by preventing total domination by any one group. The transition from monarchy to republic also left cultural marks. Romans began to see themselves not as subjects of a king, but as citizens of a commonwealth. The Latin word residential publica literally means the public thing, the shared state belonging to all. This sense of citizenship was revolutionary. It instilled pride, duty, and a sense of collective destiny. To be Roman was not merely to live in the city, but to share in its burdens and glories. As the Republic grew, the Romans developed a tradition of civic virtue. The greatest honor was to serve the state, whether in war or politics. Citizens were expected to place the needs of the community above personal ambition. Stories were told of men who sacrificed wealth, comfort, even family for the Republic. Whether these tales were true or embellished, they shaped Roman ideals. One such story was that of Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, a farmer who was called to serve as dictator in a moment of crisis. After defeating Rome's enemies, he laid down his power and returned to his plow, embodying the ideal that power should be used for duty, not self-interest. This ideal of service and suspicion of unchecked authority defined the early Republic. Though corruption and ambition were never absent, the Romans maintained a constant vigilance. Their political culture was built on balance, rotation, and accountability. Even when they bent these principles in times of crisis, they never forgot the lesson of Tarquin, that tyranny must not return. The birth of the Roman Republic was not a single event but a process. It began with outrage over a king's abuses, was forged in war against external enemies and matured through internal struggles for justice. By replacing monarchy with a mixed constitution, Rome set itself on a path of remarkable resilience. This system, imperfect though it was, gave Rome the flexibility to expand from a small city-state to a Mediterranean power. Looking back, the Romans themselves celebrated the founding of the Republic as the beginning of their true greatness. They believed that their freedom, their laws, and their citizen spirit distinguished them from others. It was this conviction, nurtured by memory and myth, that sustained them through centuries of challenges. Thus, from the ashes of monarchy arose a republic, not flawless, not free of conflict, but enduring. It was a republic that taught Rome to value balance, to resist tyranny, and to see citizenship as the highest calling. And though it would one day collapse under its own weight, the ideas born in that early revolution would echo far beyond Rome, inspiring generations yet to come. Chapter 4. The Struggle of the Orders. The Roman Republic was founded on the rejection of monarchy, but it was not founded on equality. In its earliest centuries, Roman society was sharply divided between two groups: the patricians, who belonged to the ancient aristocratic families, and the plebeians, who made up the vast majority of the population. This division was not merely social but political, economic, and even religious. At first, the patricians monopolized power, holding the highest offices, interpreting the law, and performing the most sacred rituals. Plebeians were excluded, despite carrying the heaviest burdens of military service and labor. This imbalance gave rise to one of the most defining conflicts in Roman history: the struggle of the orders. It was not a single revolt or event, but a centuries-long process of negotiation, protest, and reform. Through it, the Republic was reshaped into a more inclusive system, though still marked by hierarchy and inequality. To understand the struggle of the orders, one must first grasp how the early republic functioned. The consuls, senate, and assemblies were dominated by patricians. Legal authority resided in unwritten customs, known as the mos maiorum, interpreted almost exclusively by patrician magistrates. Religious offices, too, were reserved for patricians, reinforcing the idea that they alone had access to the will of the gods. For plebeians, this meant not only exclusion from decision-making but also vulnerability. Debt, land disputes, and criminal charges could leave a plebeian at the mercy of a patrician judge with no recourse to appeal. The economic hardships faced by plebeians sharpened this divide. In times of war, plebeians served as soldiers, often leaving their farms unattended. Upon returning, many found themselves unable to pay debts or forced to borrow more. The punishment for debt was harsh. A debtor could be enslaved by his creditor, sometimes for life. Thus, those who defended the Republic in battle risked losing their freedom at home. This sense of injustice fueled resentment and gave rise to collective action. The first major confrontation came in 494 BC, during a period of war and crisis. The plebeians, weary of being exploited, withdrew en masse from the city to a hill outside Rome, later known as the Sacred Mount. This act, known as the First Secession, was a peaceful but powerful form of protest. Deprived of the labor and military service of the plebeians, the patricians had no choice but to negotiate. Out of this standoff came a crucial innovation: the creation of the tribunes of the plebs. The tribunes were plebeian officials elected by plebeians, with the sacred duty of protecting their interests. Their bodies were declared inviolable, meaning that anyone who harmed a tribune was cursed in the eyes of the gods. More importantly, tribunes had the right of veto, intercessio, allowing them to block actions by magistrates or assemblies that threatened the plebeians. This was a radical development, For the first time, an official existed whose sole purpose was to defend the people against the state. The establishment of the tribunate did not end the conflict. It was the beginning of a long struggle to expand plebeian rights. The next great demand was for written laws. In the early republic, laws were based on custom and precedent, but only patricians knew these traditions in detail. This secrecy allowed them to manipulate the law to their advantage. Plebeians insisted that the law be made public, so that all could know their rights and obligations. After years of pressure, a commission was appointed to draft a code. The result was the Law of the 12 Tables, completed around 450 BCE. The 12 tables were displayed publicly in the forum, engraved on bronze tablets. They covered matters ranging from family and property to crime and punishment. While the laws themselves were harsh, debtors could still be enslaved, and punishments were severe. Their publication was a milestone. For the first time, justice was no longer hidden within aristocratic privilege. The 12 Tables became the foundation of Roman law, revered for centuries as the embodiment of equality before the law, even if imperfectly realized. The struggle continued, however, as plebeians sought access to higher offices. In the early republic, only patricians could be consuls, giving them exclusive control over military and political power. Plebeians pressed for change, sometimes threatening further secession if ignored. Gradually, reforms opened the consulship and other magistracies to plebeians. By the mid-4th century BC, laws were passed ensuring that at least one consul could be plebeian. This was a symbolic and practical victory, demonstrating that the republic belonged to all citizens, not just the aristocracy. Other offices were also made accessible. The praetorship, responsible for judicial matters, and the censorship, which oversaw the census and public morals, eventually admitted plebeians. Even the priesthoods, once strictly patrician, were opened. The struggle was not only political but also cultural. Plebeians asserted that they were as capable of interpreting the will of the gods as their patrician counterparts. This eroded the ideological foundation of patrician superiority. One of the most significant outcomes of the struggle of the orders was the rise of the concilium plebis, the plebeian council. Originally informal, this assembly grew into a powerful institution that passed laws binding on plebeians. Over time, especially after the Lex Hortensia of 287 BC, the decisions of the plebeian council gained the force of law over the entire Roman state. This marked the culmination of plebeian efforts. Their assembly, led by their tribunes, had become a central organ of the republic. It is important to note that the struggle of the orders was not a revolution in the modern sense. The plebeians did not overthrow the republic. They reshaped it from within. Their methods were collective but peaceful: secession, protest, and negotiation. The patricians, for their part, often resisted but ultimately compromised, recognizing that the republic could not function without the participation of its majority population. The result was a more balanced system, though still deeply unequal. Wealth continued to define influence, and even successful plebeians often merged with the patrician elite, creating a new class of nobility, the nobiles. The legacy of the struggle of the orders was profound. It created mechanisms of accountability and inclusion that allowed the republic to endure. The tribunate remained a vital check on abuses of power. The 12 Tables established a tradition of codified law. The opening of offices to plebeians broadened the pool of leadership, ensuring that the republic was not entirely an aristocratic oligarchy. At the same time, the struggle revealed the resilience of Roman political culture. Romans valued compromise, seeing it as a means of preserving unity. They were pragmatic, willing to adjust institutions to prevent collapse. This pragmatism would later enable Rome to absorb new peoples, expand its citizenship, and adapt its government to changing circumstances. Yet the struggle of the orders also planted seeds of future conflict. The tribunate, while a protector of the people, could also become a tool of ambitious politicians. The idea that assemblies could override the Senate foreshadowed the clashes of the late Republic, when leaders like the Gracchi, Marius, and Caesar would use popular support to challenge aristocratic authority. The balance achieved in the early Republic was fragile, and its eventual breakdown owed much to the very institutions created during this struggle. Still, in its own time, the struggle of the orders was a triumph of persistence and collective action. Plebeians transformed their position from marginalized subjects to active citizens. They proved that the Republic could evolve, that its foundations were not fixed but negotiable. In doing so, they gave Rome a flexibility rare in the ancient world, one that would help sustain it through centuries of conquest and change. By the end of the struggle, Rome was a different state than it had been at its founding. No longer merely a patrician stronghold, it was a community where all citizens had, at least in theory, a stake. The Republic had grown stronger through conflict, tempered by the demands of justice and inclusion. And though inequalities remained, the spirit of the struggle, the insistence that no group be silenced forever, would echo throughout Roman history. Thus, the struggle of the orders was not merely a chapter in Roman politics, but a lesson in the power of collective will. It showed that even in a rigid society, change was possible when people acted together. It was a reminder that liberty, however defined, required constant defense and negotiation. And it laid the groundwork for the Republic's greatest achievements, and, in time, for its greatest crisis. Chapter 5. Rome's Wars with the Latin and Italian Neighbors. The early Republic, forged in the fires of internal struggle between patricians and plebeians, did not exist in isolation. Rome was never simply a city-state minding its own affairs. From the beginning, its survival depended on its ability to navigate a world filled with rival peoples, hostile neighbors, and shifting alliances. The Italian peninsula in the early centuries of the Republic was a patchwork of communities. Latin cities, Sabines, Etruscans, Samnites, and many others. Each had its own traditions, its own ambitions, and its own rivalries. For Rome to secure its position, it needed to fight, negotiate, and conquer. The wars with its Latin and Italian neighbors were not just battles for territory. They were contests for survival, prestige, and the right to lead. In the earliest days of the Republic, Rome was one of many Latin towns. The Latins shared a common language and similar religious practices, and they were bound by the Latin League, a loose alliance of cities. Yet unity among the Latins was fragile. While they cooperated against external threats, they also competed for dominance. Rome, with its growing population and strategic location by the Tiber River, was both a partner and a rival. Tensions flared repeatedly, leading to cycles of alliance and war. One of the earliest great conflicts was the Latin War of the late 4th century BCE. By then, Rome had grown in strength through victories over the Etruscans and Volsci. The Latin cities, fearing Roman dominance, rebelled. The war culminated in the famous Battle of Lake Regillus, where Roman tradition claims divine intervention decided the outcome. According to legend, the twin horsemen Castor and Pollux, gods revered across the Greek and Roman world, appeared on the battlefield to fight for Rome. Their sudden vision was said to have terrified the enemy and assured Roman victory. Whether or not this miraculous tale was true, the battle became a cornerstone of Roman identity, symbolizing the gods' favor and Rome's destined leadership. After defeating the Latins, Rome reorganized the alliance on its own terms. Instead of treating its allies as equals, it bound them in a web of bilateral treaties. Each community was linked to Rome, but not to one another, preventing collective resistance. This system of alliances, known as the Foedera, was a stroke of political genius. It allowed Rome to harness the manpower of Italy without granting its allies too much independence. Latin soldiers fought alongside Romans in wars, sharing in victories, but rarely in full citizenship. Over time, this arrangement expanded Rome's reach across the peninsula. Yet the Latins were not the only neighbors Rome had to contend with. To the north lay the Etruscans, a powerful people whose cities were wealthy and sophisticated. In earlier centuries, Etruscan kings had ruled Rome, and their influence remained strong. The struggle against the Etruscans was long and bitter. Towns like Veii, only 12 miles from Rome, posed constant threats. The siege of Veii, which lasted nearly a decade in the early 4th century BC, became one of Rome's defining wars. It was said to be the first time Rome paid its soldiers a regular wage, transforming the army from a seasonal militia into a more professional force. When Veii finally fell, Rome gained not only new territory, but also a sense of destiny. The capture of Veii doubled Rome's domain and demonstrated its ability to conquer sophisticated enemies. But even greater challenges lay ahead. To the east and south lived the Samnites, a hardy mountain people renowned for their toughness and ferocity. The Samnites were not city dwellers, like the Latins or Etruscans, but lived in scattered hill villages, making them difficult to subdue. Their warriors fought with distinctive armor and carried oblong shields, tactics well suited to the rugged terrain of central Italy. Rome would fight 3 long wars against the Samnites, stretching over half a century, and these conflicts would test the Republic to its limits. The First Samnite War broke out in 343 BC over disputes in Campania, a fertile region near modern Naples. Although short, it was fierce, and Rome emerged with increased influence in the south. The Second Samnite War, beginning in 326 BC, was far more serious. Early in the war, Rome suffered one of its most humiliating defeats at the Battle of the Caudine Forks. Trapped in a mountain pass by the Samnites, an entire Roman army was forced to surrender. According to tradition, the Romans were made to pass under a yoke of spears, a ritual humiliation symbolizing their submission. The memory of this disaster burned deep into Roman pride, but it also steeled their determination. Rome refused to accept defeat, reorganized its forces, and eventually ground down the Samnites through sheer persistence. The Samnite Wars reshaped the Roman military. During these conflicts, the Manipular Legion emerged, a more flexible formation than the old phalanx borrowed from the Greeks. Instead of fighting in a single rigid block, Roman soldiers were arranged in smaller units called maniples, which could maneuver independently on the battlefield. This adaptation proved decisive in the mountainous terrain of Italy and became a hallmark of Roman tactics for centuries. In this way, Rome learned from its enemies, turning defeats into innovations. By the end of the Third Samnite War in 290 BC, Rome had decisively broken Samnite power and established dominance over most of central Italy. Yet Rome did not annihilate its foes. Instead, it incorporated them into its alliance system. Former enemies were bound by treaties, required to provide troops, and allowed limited autonomy. The genius of Rome's expansion lay in this combination of military strength and political integration. Conquered peoples became contributors to Rome's power rather than permanent rebels. The wars with Latins, Etruscans, and Samnites were not isolated struggles, but interconnected steps in Rome's rise. Each victory expanded Roman influence, increased its manpower, and brought new resources. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome was the preeminent power in Italy, though not yet unchallenged. To the south lay the wealthy Greek colonies of Magna Graecia, and across the seas loomed the great power of Carthage. But within Italy itself, Rome had established a system that bound together diverse peoples under its leadership. The cultural impact of these wars was immense. Roman identity became tied to the idea of perseverance in the face of adversity. The humiliations at places like the Caudine Forks were never forgotten, but they were retold as stories of resilience. Rome might stumble, but it never surrendered. This narrative of tenacity became central to Roman self-understanding, inspiring future generations of soldiers and statesmen. At the same time, Rome's treatment of its allies sowed seeds of future conflict. While allies contributed soldiers and resources, they remained second-class participants, lacking full political rights. Over the centuries, this inequality would lead to resentment, eventually erupting in the social war of the 1st century BCE. But in the early Republic, Rome's system was stable enough to sustain expansion. The willingness of allies to march with Rome's legions gave the Republic a military machine unmatched in the ancient Mediterranean. Looking back, the wars with Rome's Latin and Italian neighbors illustrate the Republic's unique combination of toughness and adaptability. Rome did not win every battle, but it won wars. It endured humiliations, learned from them, and returned stronger. It faced diverse enemies, city dwellers, hill tribes, aristocrats, and farmers, and found ways to incorporate them into its system. This mixture of military strength and political flexibility made Rome more than just another Italian city. It made Rome the nucleus of an empire. By conquering Italy step by step, Rome laid the foundations for future greatness. The struggles of these centuries taught it how to endure setbacks, how to integrate conquered peoples, and how to adapt its army and institutions to new challenges. The wars with Latins, Etruscans, and Samnites were not just local conflicts, they were the crucible in which the Roman Republic was forged. And from that crucible would emerge a power capable of challenging the greatest kingdoms of the ancient world. Chapter 6: The Pyrrhic War and the Coming of Rome to the Greek World. By the late 4th century BCE, Rome had established dominance over much of central and southern Italy, but the Italian peninsula remained a patchwork of cultures, languages, and rival powers. To the south lay the Greek cities of Magna Graecia, wealthy, sophisticated, and militarily capable. Tarentum, the largest of these cities, was particularly powerful, controlling trade and naval power in the region. Rome's expansion into this area was inevitable, but it brought the Republic into direct conflict with Hellenistic culture and warfare. This clash culminated in what history remembers as the Pyrrhic War, a campaign that demonstrated both the resilience and the strategic ingenuity of Rome, while also introducing it to the wider Greek world. The conflict began around 280 BCE, when the Greek city of Tarentum, alarmed by Roman influence in southern Italy, sought external support. Tarentum's leaders appealed to King Pyrrhus of Epirus, a Greek monarch from the western Balkans. Pyrrhus was a warrior king, trained in Hellenistic warfare, and renowned for his campaigns in Greece and Macedonia. He responded enthusiastically, seeing an opportunity to expand his influence into Italy and establish a western foothold for Greek power. Pyrrhus arrived with a formidable army that included phalanx infantry, cavalry, and, most famously, war elephants, creatures unfamiliar to the Roman legions and capable of causing terror on the battlefield. The first engagement between Rome and Pyrrhus occurred near Heraclea in 280 BCE. The Roman army, disciplined but inexperienced with elephants and the tactics of the Greek phalanx, suffered heavy losses. Pyrrhus won the battle, but the victory was costly. Contemporary sources recount that Pyrrhus remarked, "Another such victory, and we are undone," giving rise to the term Pyrrhic victory, meaning a triumph that comes at devastating cost. Rome, although defeated, did not collapse. The losses were painful, but the Republic had a unique advantage: its manpower. Rome could draw on a large pool of citizens, levy new armies, and maintain campaigns even in the face of repeated setbacks. The war continued the following year with the Battle of Asculum. Again, Pyrrhus inflicted heavy casualties on the Romans, but at great expense to his own forces. His elite units were depleted, and maintaining supply lines across the Adriatic and within southern Italy proved challenging. Meanwhile, the Romans, learning from their defeats, adapted their strategies. They avoided direct confrontation with elephants when possible, exploited gaps in the phalanx, and leveraged the flexibility of their manipular formations. The ability to adjust tactics, rather than rely on fixed formations, gave Rome a distinct edge over Hellenistic armies accustomed to rigid battlefield arrangements. In 275 BC, the decisive encounter occurred at the Battle of Beneventum. By this time, Pyrrhus, despite his skill and charisma, faced dwindling resources and declining morale among his troops. The Romans, resilient and disciplined, engaged him once more. The battle ended indecisively, but strategically it marked the end of Pyrrhus' campaign in Italy. Facing mounting difficulties, he withdrew back to Epirus, leaving Rome as the unchallenged power in southern Italy. Though Rome had not decisively destroyed Pyrrhus' army in a single battle, the war demonstrated a key feature of Roman warfare: endurance and the ability to absorb losses that would cripple most other states. The Pyrrhic War had profound consequences for Rome and the wider Mediterranean. First, it exposed Rome to Hellenistic military techniques, including the phalanx, cavalry maneuvers, and war elephants. Roman commanders observed these tactics carefully and incorporated lessons learned into their own evolving military doctrine. Second, it expanded Rome's awareness of the Greek world, its cities, and its complex political alliances. Rome was no longer a regional Italian power. It had engaged directly with a foreign king and survived, signaling its emergence onto the wider stage. The war also had cultural implications. Roman elites, who had long regarded Greek cities with both admiration and suspicion, now encountered Hellenistic sophistication firsthand. Greek art, literature, and philosophy began to influence Roman society, especially among the patrician class. Soldiers returning from campaigns brought tales of magnificent cities, temples, and institutions that contrasted with the more austere Italian towns. This interaction laid the groundwork for the later, more deliberate Hellenization of Roman culture, which would reach its peak during the Republic's expansion into the eastern Mediterranean. Strategically, the Pyrrhic War solidified Rome's approach to alliances and diplomacy. The Republic had relied on a combination of military force and negotiated agreements with local cities. After the withdrawal of Pyrrhus, Rome absorbed many of the previously independent Greek towns into its network of allies. Some cities were granted citizenship with limitations, others became municipia under Roman law, and all were bound by treaties that ensured loyalty while preserving local governance. This system of incorporation, honed in earlier wars against the Latins and Samnites, proved remarkably effective, allowing Rome to expand without provoking widespread rebellion. The conflict also underscored the importance of Roman discipline and civic ideology. Unlike Pyrrhus' mercenary-based army, which relied heavily on hired soldiers from diverse regions, Rome's legions were composed of citizen soldiers with personal stakes in the city's survival. Each soldier had property to defend, a family to protect, and an oath to the Republic. This commitment created cohesion and resilience that mercenary forces often lacked. Over time, Roman commanders learned to exploit this advantage, emphasizing training, unit cohesion, and morale as much as tactics. The Pyrrhic War was, in many ways, a turning point in Roman expansion. It marked the transition from a regional power dominating central and southern Italy to a state capable of confronting kings from across the Adriatic and the Greek world. Rome had demonstrated that it could survive encounters with armies considered superior in training, equipment, and strategy. This confidence would serve the Republic in the coming centuries, as it faced Carthage, Macedon, and eventually the vast Hellenistic kingdoms of the eastern Mediterranean. By the end of the war, Rome's reputation had changed. Former allies now recognized the Republic as a formidable power, capable of endurance and strategic patience. Rome's citizens had learned that losses were not necessarily fatal, and that flexibility, discipline, and civic unity could overcome even the most skilled adversaries. Pyrrhus, for all his brilliance, could not match Rome's capacity to endure and adapt. The Pyrrhic War also reinforced an enduring Roman principle, that victory alone is insufficient if it comes at too great a cost. Pyrrhus repeated victories weakened him and drained his resources, while Rome, though suffering battlefield losses, emerged stronger in the long term. The Republic internalized the lesson that persistence, institutional resilience, and careful management of resources were as important as immediate triumphs. In sum, the Pyrrhic War was more than a military campaign. It was a formative experience that expanded Rome's horizons, strengthened its military, and introduced it to the Greek world. It taught Romans how to confront sophisticated adversaries, how to incorporate new territories, and how to adapt culturally and militarily. The war laid the foundation for Rome's future conquests in the eastern Mediterranean, where it would eventually confront the successors of Alexander the Great, challenging empires far older and more established than itself. Through these trials, Rome emerged not only victorious but transformed. Its citizens, soldiers, and leaders had been tested by a foreign king of legendary skill and by the military traditions of Greece. Yet the Republic endured, absorbing lessons, consolidating alliances, and expanding its reach. The Pyrrhic War, therefore, was not simply a battle for southern Italy. It was the opening chapter of Rome's rise as a Mediterranean power, a moment when the Republic first proved that its endurance, discipline, and political acumen could match any kingdom, anywhere. Chapter 7: Rome and Carthage, the First Punic War. By the mid-3rd century BC, Rome had emerged as the dominant power in Italy, consolidating control over former Latin, Samnite, and Greek territories. Its legions had adapted to various forms of warfare, integrating lessons from the Samnites, Etruscans, and even Pyrrhus of Epirus. Yet the Republic now faced a new and formidable challenge: the great maritime power of Carthage. Located on the North African coast, Carthage controlled extensive territories in Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, and commanded a fleet capable of projecting force across the Mediterranean. The clash between Rome and Carthage would define the next century and mark the beginning of the Punic Wars, a series of conflicts that would shape both civilizations. The immediate cause of the First Punic War, which began in 264 BCE, was Sicily, a strategically vital island rich in resources and trade opportunities. The Sicilian city of Messana found itself threatened by Mamertines, mercenaries, who had seized the town and sought protection. The Mamertines appealed to both Rome and Carthage for aid. Carthage, already established in western Sicily, saw an opportunity to expand its influence, while Rome, wary of a foreign power so close to Italian shores, decided to intervene. This seemingly local dispute escalated into a full-scale conflict, drawing the Republic into its first major war beyond the Italian mainland. At the outset, Rome faced a daunting challenge. It had virtually no naval tradition. Its experience lay in land warfare, not the complex maneuvering of warships. Carthage, by contrast, was a seasoned maritime power, its fleet seasoned by centuries of trade, piracy, and conflict in the western Mediterranean. The Romans, however, were nothing if not inventive. According to tradition, they captured a Carthaginian quinquereme, a type of warship, and used it as a model to construct a fleet of their own. More importantly, they introduced a remarkable innovation: the corvus, a boarding device that allowed Roman soldiers to board enemy vessels and fight hand-to-hand. This innovation effectively turned naval battles into land battles at sea, playing to Rome's strengths in infantry combat. The First Punic War lasted over 2 decades, from 264 to 241 BCE, and was characterized by grueling sieges, decisive naval battles, and immense human cost. Sicily became the primary theater of operations, with both Rome and Carthage vying for control of key cities such as Agrigentum, Syracuse, and Panormus. Rome's early successes on land demonstrated its growing ability to adapt and conquer, but Carthage's naval supremacy initially stymied the Republic's ambitions. It was only through persistence, strategic innovation, and repeated investment in shipbuilding that Rome could challenge Carthaginian dominance at sea. One of the most famous engagements of the war was the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE. The Romans, using the corvus to neutralize Carthage's naval expertise, achieved their first significant victory at sea. This success not only boosted Roman morale, but also demonstrated that ingenuity and adaptation could offset experience and technological advantage. Over the following years, Rome gradually built a fleet capable of engaging Carthage on multiple fronts, including the major battles at Ecnomus in 256 BCE and the campaigns in North Africa. Despite these achievements, the war exacted a heavy toll. Both sides suffered enormous losses of men and ships. Historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of soldiers and sailors perished over the course of the conflict. Sicily became a devastated landscape of sieges, scorched fields, and displaced populations. Economically, both Rome and Carthage drained resources to maintain their armies and fleets, demonstrating the immense cost of prolonged warfare. The final phase of the First Punic War focused on the Carthaginian stronghold of Drepana and the island of Sicily itself. Roman forces, demonstrating superior persistence and coordination, captured key positions, forcing Carthage to negotiate. The resulting peace treaty in 241 BC marked a decisive Roman victory. Carthage surrendered Sicily, paying a substantial indemnity, and Rome became the first Italian power to establish a province outside the mainland. This victory not only expanded Roman influence, but also signaled the Republic's capacity for sustained conflict against a foreign empire. The First Punic War had far-reaching consequences for Rome's military, political, and cultural development. Militarily, the conflict highlighted the importance of adaptability. Rome's ability to build a fleet, innovate with the corvus, and train soldiers for naval engagements demonstrated the Republic's flexibility and resourcefulness. The war also emphasized the value of endurance. Carthage, despite its naval superiority, could not outlast Rome's capacity to replace losses, maintain supply lines, and continue fighting over decades. Politically, The victory reinforced the authority of the Senate and the consuls, whose decisions during wartime shaped the Republic's strategy and long-term expansion. The experience also encouraged a more centralized approach to resource management, including the financing of fleets, recruitment of troops, and administration of newly acquired territories. Sicily, now a Roman province, became a testing ground for governance, taxation, and integration of conquered peoples, a model that would be replicated across the expanding republic. Culturally, the war exposed Rome to the broader Mediterranean world. Soldiers and merchants encountered Carthaginian practices, mercenary traditions, and trade networks, while Roman society began to absorb elements of Punic knowledge in navigation, agriculture, and warfare. The confrontation also solidified Rome's sense of destiny. Surviving a protracted war against a sophisticated empire reinforced the belief that the Republic was exceptional, favored by fortune, and capable of enduring challenges that would have destroyed lesser states. Yet the First Punic War also sowed seeds for future conflict. Carthage, humiliated and economically strained, was determined to recover its influence. Rome, emboldened by victory, sought further expansion into Sicily and beyond. The stage was set for continued rivalry, which would erupt in the Second Punic War, a conflict that would test the Republic's resilience and military genius to unprecedented levels. The legacy of the First Punic War lies not only in territorial gain, but in the demonstration of Roman determination, ingenuity, and institutional strength. It marked the Republic's first major step into the wider Mediterranean, transforming it from a regional Italian power into a player on the international stage. The war also underscored a key Roman principle, that persistence, discipline, and adaptation could overcome even the most experienced and resourceful adversaries. In the decades following the war, Rome continued to consolidate its control over Sicily, establishing the province as a critical source of grain, manpower, and strategic influence. The Senate and consuls learned to administer distant territories, setting precedents for taxation, military oversight, and integration of local populations. These experiences would prove invaluable as Rome expanded further into Hispania, Gaul, and eventually the eastern Mediterranean. Ultimately, the First Punic War was more than a struggle for Sicily. It was a crucible in which Rome's military, political, and cultural identity was forged. It demonstrated the Republic's capacity to endure prolonged conflict, innovate in the face of unfamiliar challenges, and integrate new territories into its expanding system. By surviving and emerging victorious against Carthage, Rome confirmed its destiny as a power capable of confronting the greatest civilizations of the ancient world, setting the stage for the epic conflicts and transformations that would define the coming centuries. Chapter 8: Hannibal and the Second Punic War. The First Punic War had established Rome as a formidable Mediterranean power, but it had also left Carthage wounded and determined to reclaim its lost influence. By the early 3rd century BCE, tensions between Rome and Carthage simmered, fueled by disputes in Spain, trade rivalries, and the lingering resentment from the harsh terms of the 241 BCE treaty. These tensions erupted into what would become one of the most dramatic and consequential conflicts in ancient history, the Second Punic War. At the center of this conflict stood one of history's greatest military commanders, Hannibal Barca, whose daring campaigns would challenge the Republic's endurance, strategy, and very survival. Hannibal was born in 247 BC in Carthage, the son of Hamilcar Barca, a general who had fought in the First Punic War. From an early age, Hannibal was immersed in the culture of warfare and strategy. According to tradition, Hamilcar made Hannibal swear an oath of eternal enmity against Rome, instilling in him a personal and lifelong determination to oppose the Republic. By the 220s BC, Hannibal had risen through the Carthaginian ranks, demonstrating exceptional skill as a commander in Spain, where Carthage sought to expand its territory and resources to compensate for the losses suffered in Sicily. The immediate spark of the war was the siege and subsequent capture of Saguntum, a Roman ally in eastern Spain, in 219 BCE. Hannibal's attack on the city violated Rome's sphere of influence, providing the Republic with both cause and motivation to respond. Rome demanded Hannibal's surrender, but Carthage refused. Diplomatic efforts failed, and in 218 BC, war was formally declared. From the very outset, the conflict promised to be vast and devastating. Hannibal's boldest and most celebrated maneuver came early in the war. In 218 BC, he led an army of approximately 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and dozens of war elephants across the Pyrenees, through southern Gaul, and over the Alps into Italy. This journey was remarkable not only for its logistical complexity, but for its audacity. The Alps were treacherous and winter harsh, yet Hannibal pressed on, suffering heavy losses, but arriving in Italy with enough forces to challenge Rome's armies directly. The crossing became legendary, symbolizing both Hannibal's daring and the Republic's first encounter with a truly mobile and strategic foreign threat on Italian soil. Hannibal's campaign in Italy was characterized by both brilliance and innovation. He avoided direct assaults on heavily fortified Roman cities, instead seeking to weaken Rome through alliances with disaffected Italian communities and a series of tactical battles that maximized his mobility and diverse army. The Battle of the Trebia in 218 BC marked his first major victory on Italian soil, where he outmaneuvered the Romans and utilized ambush tactics that highlighted his understanding of terrain, deception, and timing. The Romans, though defeated, were not destroyed and quickly regrouped, demonstrating the resilience that would define their response throughout the war. The following year, at Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, Hannibal orchestrated one of history's most famous ambushes. By luring the Roman forces into a narrow valley and concealing his troops on the surrounding hills, Hannibal achieved a near-total annihilation of the Roman army present. This victory solidified his reputation as a master strategist and sent shockwaves through the Republic. Panic spread in Rome itself, and the Senate faced the daunting task of raising new armies while managing fear among its citizens. Yet the Romans did not capitulate. They adapted, mobilizing reserves and reinforcing their legions with disciplined recruits who understood that endurance, not just battlefield success, would determine the outcome. In 216 BC, Hannibal achieved his most famous triumph at the Battle of Cannae. With approximately 40,000 troops against a Roman force of over 80,000, he executed a double envelopment that trapped and destroyed the Roman army. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands of Roman soldiers were killed, marking one of the deadliest battles in ancient history. Despite the catastrophic loss, Rome refused to surrender. The Republic demonstrated extraordinary resilience, raising new armies, adapting its strategies, and relying on the loyalty of allies who remained committed despite the defeats. Hannibal's successes in Italy revealed both his genius and the limitations of his campaign. He won battles but lacked the resources and reinforcements to besiege Rome itself. His forces were increasingly reliant on Italian allies, some of whom remained uncertain in their loyalty. Rome, on the other hand, adopted a war of attrition, avoiding large-scale confrontations while harassing Hannibal's supply lines, fortifying key positions, and gradually reclaiming territory. This strategy, championed by the dictator Fabius Maximus, who earned the nickname Cunctator, or the Delay, exemplified Roman prudence and the Republic's ability to learn from adversity. Meanwhile, Carthage struggled to support Hannibal from abroad. Supplies, reinforcements, and political coordination across the Mediterranean were difficult, especially with Roman forces increasingly challenging Carthaginian positions in Spain and Africa. Rome's strategic flexibility, combined with Hannibal's inability to receive decisive support, shifted the long-term balance of the war. By the early 210s BC, Rome had regained much of southern Italy, isolated Hannibal, and prepared to bring the fight to Carthaginian holdings beyond the peninsula. A critical turning point came with the campaigns in Spain, led by the Roman general Scipio Africanus. Rome sought to cut off Hannibal's support by capturing Carthaginian territories in the Iberian Peninsula. Scipio's victories, including the decisive Battle of Ilipa in 206 BC, deprived Hannibal of reinforcements and resources, weakening his position in Italy. Scipio then invaded North Africa, compelling Carthage to recall Hannibal to defend the homeland. This strategic reversal shifted the focus from Italy to the African theater, where Rome would confront Carthage directly. The final confrontation occurred at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. Scipio's disciplined forces faced Hannibal's experienced army, including the remaining war elephants. Roman tactics, including flexible manipular formations and coordinated cavalry attacks, neutralized the elephants and overwhelmed the Carthaginian lines. Hannibal was defeated decisively, ending the Second Punic War. The Treaty of Zama imposed severe terms on Carthage, heavy indemnities, limitations on its military, and loss of its empire outside Africa. Rome emerged as the dominant power in the western Mediterranean, its military reputation solidified, and its path toward empire secured. The Second Punic War had profound implications for Rome. Militarily, it demonstrated the Republic's capacity to recover from catastrophic defeats, innovate strategically, and maintain civic cohesion under immense pressure. Politically, it reinforced the Senate's authority while highlighting the importance of competent and flexible leadership, exemplified by Scipio Africanus, and the cautious prudence of Fabius Maximus. Culturally, the conflict cemented Rome's identity as a resilient state, one capable of confronting and overcoming extraordinary challenges through discipline, strategy, and endurance. Hannibal, though ultimately defeated, became a symbol of brilliance and audacity. His campaigns forced Rome to confront the limits of conventional warfare, adapt its methods, and expand its strategic vision. The war left an enduring legacy in military history, illustrating the interplay between tactical genius and the resilience of a disciplined, organized state. In conclusion, the Second Punic War tested the very foundations of the Roman Republic. Hannibal's victories were breathtaking, but Rome's endurance, adaptability, and institutional strength proved decisive. The Republic emerged stronger, having expanded its influence, consolidated its resources, and demonstrated the enduring power of its military and political systems. This conflict would serve as a model for Rome's approach to empire, combining tactical innovation with strategic patience, integrating conquered territories, and relying on the resilience of its citizens to secure long-term success. Chapter 9: Rome's Conquest of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Second Punic War marked a turning point for Rome, establishing the Republic as the preeminent power in the Western Mediterranean. However, Rome's ambitions did not stop there. With Carthage weakened and the Italian peninsula secure, the Republic began to turn its attention eastward, toward the Hellenistic kingdoms that dominated Greece, Asia Minor, and the Eastern Mediterranean. These kingdoms, Macedon, the Seleucid Empire, and Ptolemaic Egypt, were heirs to the empire of Alexander the Great, possessing wealth, armies, and sophisticated political systems. Rome's encounters with these powers would redefine its role in the ancient world, expand its influence far beyond Italy, and ultimately lay the groundwork for a Mediterranean empire. The first major Roman involvement in the eastern Mediterranean arose from conflicts in Greece, particularly the Hellenistic kingdom of Macedon. Macedon, under the rule of Philip V, sought to expand influence in the Adriatic and the Aegean Sea, threatening Roman allies in southern Italy and Sicily. Rome, wary of any rival power that could challenge its dominance, intervened in 200 BC, forming alliances with Greek city-states such as Pergamum and Rhodes. This diplomatic network allowed Rome to extend its influence without immediate large-scale occupation, relying on a combination of naval power, military intervention, and local alliances. The resulting conflict, known as the Second Macedonian War, 200 to 197 BC, showcased Rome's growing ability to project power beyond the Italian peninsula. The Roman general Titus Quinctius Flamininus led campaigns across Greece, utilizing both diplomacy and military engagement to undermine Macedonian authority. The decisive Battle of Cynocephaly in 197 BC demonstrated Rome's tactical innovation and adaptability. Roman legions, with their flexible manipular formations, exploited gaps in the rigid Macedonian phalanx, achieving a decisive victory. This battle symbolized the superiority of Rome's military system over the traditional Hellenistic style of warfare, combining discipline, adaptability, and strategic foresight. Following Cynocephaly, Rome declared the freedom of the Greeks, positioning itself as a liberator rather than a conqueror. Cities such as Athens, Sparta, and Corinth were formally recognized as autonomous, though in practice they remained under Rome's influence. This approach demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of soft power. By presenting itself as a protector and ally, Rome could maintain control without direct administration. Over time, this strategy would allow the Republic to integrate diverse populations while minimizing resistance, a hallmark of Roman expansion. Meanwhile, Rome's involvement in the eastern Mediterranean expanded beyond Greece. The Seleucid Empire, under Antiochus III, sought to extend influence into Asia Minor and Greece, challenging Rome's emerging hegemony. The Roman-Syrian War, 192 to 188 BC, tested the Republic's strategic reach. Rome, allied with Pergamum and Rhodes, faced the Seleucid phalanxes and war elephants, a familiar but still challenging threat. The decisive Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC demonstrated Rome's ability to adapt to new tactical challenges. Using disciplined infantry formations, combined arms coordination, and tactical maneuvering, Roman forces defeated the Seleucid army decisively. The Treaty of Apamea in 188 BC curtailed Antiochus' power, reinforced Rome's influence in Asia Minor, and established a system of client states and alliances that further extended the Republic's reach. In parallel, Rome's engagement with the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt highlighted its emerging role as a Mediterranean arbiter. While Egypt was not conquered outright, Roman diplomacy and naval power increasingly shaped the balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean. Rome became the arbiter of disputes, leveraging alliances and treaties to maintain stability while ensuring that no single power could challenge its supremacy. This strategy reflected a combination of military force and calculated diplomacy, demonstrating that Roman expansion relied not solely on conquest, but on strategic influence, coercion, and political integration. The conquest of the eastern Mediterranean also had profound economic implications. Rome gained access to the wealth of Hellenistic cities, including trade networks, taxation opportunities, and agricultural resources. Sicily, already under Roman control, became a model for provincial administration, while the eastern provinces provided additional revenue and manpower. These resources fueled further military campaigns, public works, and urban development, reinforcing Rome's capacity for long-term expansion and governance. Culturally, Rome's encounters with the Greek world transformed the Republic in subtle but profound ways. Roman elites were exposed to Greek philosophy, literature, art, and science. Greek tutors instructed Roman children, and Greek artistic styles influenced architecture and sculpture in Italy. This cultural integration, combined with political and military dominance, created a synthesis in which Roman pragmatism absorbed and adapted Hellenistic sophistication. The Eastern Mediterranean became both a source of wealth and a conduit for cultural enrichment, enhancing Rome's prestige and capacity for governance. The Eastern campaigns also tested the Republic's institutional flexibility. The Senate and magistrates managed distant conflicts, oversaw alliances, and coordinated logistics across hundreds of miles of territory. These experiences strengthened Roman political institutions, demonstrating the capacity of a citizen state to administer an increasingly complex and expansive domain. Lessons learned in Greece and Asia Minor would later prove essential as Rome confronted Carthage again, subjugated Iberia, and eventually integrated provinces in Gaul and North Africa. Strategically, the conquest of the Eastern Mediterranean reinforced Rome's approach to client states and alliances. Rather than imposing direct rule immediately, Rome often allowed local rulers to maintain nominal authority while ensuring loyalty through treaties, garrisons, or oversight. This flexible system minimized rebellion and allowed Rome to extend influence without overextending its military. Over time, client states became vital contributors of troops, supplies, and revenue, creating a network that amplified Rome's power far beyond the Italian peninsula. By the late 2nd century BC, Rome's presence in the eastern Mediterranean was secure. Macedon was divided into autonomous republics under Roman oversight. The Seleucid Empire was weakened and constrained, and Greek city-states were firmly under Roman influence. The Republic had transitioned from a regional power to a Mediterranean hegemon, capable of projecting authority across vast distances. This expansion laid the foundation for the later imperial system, in which Rome would govern a diverse and interconnected world spanning Europe, Africa, and Asia. In conclusion, Rome's conquest of the eastern Mediterranean demonstrated the Republic's growing strategic sophistication, combining military prowess, diplomatic skill, and administrative innovation. Through decisive battles, alliances, and careful integration of conquered territories, Rome extended its influence far beyond Italy, establishing itself as a dominant power. The encounters with Greece, Macedon, the Seleucid Empire, and the Ptolemaic Kingdom not only expanded Rome's territory but also transformed its culture, economy, and political institutions, preparing the Republic for the challenges and opportunities of empire in the centuries to come. Chapter 10: The Roman Republic at its height, Politics, Society, and Expansion. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic had transformed from a regional power in Italy into the dominant force across the western and eastern Mediterranean. Centuries of conquest, diplomacy, and strategic alliances had extended Rome's influence from the Atlantic coast of Hispania to the shores of Asia Minor, from the islands of the Aegean to the cities of North Africa. This expansion was not merely territorial. It reshaped Roman society, politics, and culture, creating a complex state that required new forms of governance, social organization, and military adaptation. Understanding the Republic at this height provides insight into both its extraordinary achievements and the pressures that would eventually lead to its transformation into an empire. Politically, the Roman Republic was characterized by a system of checks and balances, designed to prevent any single individual from seizing absolute power. The Senate, composed of Rome's elite families, held significant influence over legislation, foreign policy, and financial matters. Magistrates, including consuls, praetors, and quaestors, executed policies and commanded armies, while assemblies of Roman citizens provided a measure of popular input. Yet this system, effective in a smaller Italy, faced unprecedented strain as the Republic expanded. The governance of distant provinces, the integration of diverse peoples, and the demands of prolonged warfare required both flexibility and innovation. Rome's provincial system evolved to meet these challenges. Conquered territories were administered through a combination of direct control and client-state arrangements. Some regions, such as Sicily, Hispania, and parts of Greece, were organized into provinces governed by Roman magistrates with imperium, authority to command armies and oversee justice. Other territories remained nominally autonomous, but were bound to Rome through treaties requiring tribute, troops, and loyalty. This system allowed Rome to project power effectively without overextending its administrative capacity. Governors were responsible for tax collection, public order, and military security, though abuses and corruption were common, leading to tensions that occasionally sparked revolt. The Roman social structure was deeply influenced by this expansion. Citizens were divided into classes: patricians, the traditional aristocracy; plebeians, the broader citizen body; and the newly prominent nobles, families who had risen through political achievement rather than birthright. Wealth accumulated through conquest created a new elite, whose fortunes were often tied to the spoils of war, trade, and provincial administration. This accumulation of wealth, while fueling public building projects, patronage networks, and political influence, also intensified social tensions, particularly between the elite and ordinary citizens. Military service remained central to Roman identity, but it too was transformed. The citizen-soldier system, which had been the backbone of early Republican armies, evolved into a more professionalized force in response to the demands of distant campaigns. Legions were deployed across vast territories, often for years at a time, and soldiers relied on standardized training, discipline, and cohesion to maintain effectiveness. Military success became closely tied to political careers, as generals who achieved victories in Spain, Gaul, or the Eastern Mediterranean could leverage their fame and wealth to secure office in Rome. This interplay between military achievement and political ambition would have profound consequences for the Republic. Rome's cultural landscape also reflected the influence of its expansion. Contact with the Greek world introduced philosophy, literature, and art into Roman society. Wealthy families often employed Greek tutors for their children, and Greek architectural and artistic styles began to appear in Roman buildings and public spaces. At the same time, Roman religion and civic traditions remained central, providing a unifying framework for an increasingly diverse population. Religious festivals, public games, and civic rituals reinforced loyalty to the Republic, while fostering a sense of shared identity among citizens and allies. Economically, expansion created both opportunities and challenges. Conquered territories provided resources, including grain, metals, and luxury goods, fueling Rome's growth and the urbanization of the city itself. Trade networks expanded across the Mediterranean, integrating distant provinces into a complex economic system. Yet the influx of wealth also created inequalities, as landowners consolidated estates, often at the expense of small farmers. This concentration of land and resources contributed to social tensions, prompting calls for reform and occasionally violent conflict. The Republic's legal system evolved alongside its expansion. Codified laws, such as the 12 Tables, provided a foundation for justice, but new legislation was needed to govern distant provinces, regulate trade, and address conflicts among Roman citizens and allies. Magistrates and governors wielded significant discretion, while the Senate enacted laws that shaped the structure and obligations of provinces. Legal reforms, alongside public office and military command, created opportunities for ambitious individuals to rise in prominence, yet also fostered rivalries and factionalism. Rome's political culture was increasingly influenced by these rivalries. The pursuit of office, military glory, and popular support became central to public life. Figures such as Gaius Marius, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, and later Julius Caesar demonstrated the power of combining military achievement with political ambition. Their careers highlighted both the strengths of the Republic, flexibility, resilience, and meritocratic potential, and its vulnerabilities, including susceptibility to personal rivalries, civil conflict, and the erosion of traditional checks on power. Internationally, Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean required constant vigilance. Carthage, though weakened after the Second Punic War, remained a rival in North Africa until the Third Punic War. Hellenistic kingdoms, including Macedon, the Seleucid Empire, and Ptolemaic Egypt, continued to interact with Rome through diplomacy, alliances, and occasional conflict. Naval power became increasingly important, as control of the Mediterranean lanes was vital for trade, troop movement, and political influence. Rome's capacity to adapt to new forms of warfare, integrate conquered peoples, and maintain strategic alliances underscored its growing strength as a state. Despite its achievements, the Republic faced underlying tensions. Social inequality, political competition, and the pressures of administering an expansive territory created friction within Roman society. Disputes over land reform, distribution of wealth, and citizenship rights occasionally erupted into violence. Military commanders with personal ambitions could challenge senatorial authority, leading to civil wars and political instability. These internal pressures foreshadowed the eventual transition from republic to empire, demonstrating that expansion, while a source of strength, also carried inherent risks. In conclusion, the Roman Republic at its height was a complex and dynamic polity. Its success relied on a combination of disciplined military forces, innovative governance, strategic diplomacy, and cultural adaptability. Expansion created wealth, prestige, and influence, but also social, political, and economic challenges that tested the resilience of its institutions. By the 1st century BC, Rome had become the dominant power in the Mediterranean, capable of projecting authority across vast distances while maintaining cohesion at home. This period illustrates the remarkable adaptability, ambition, and resourcefulness of the Republic, setting the stage for both its enduring legacy and the transformations that would ultimately lead to the Roman Empire.